Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Mark Henry. Today we're going to be talking about how to troubleshoot Open-AudIT discoveries. So for those of you who are coming to an Autmantic webinar live for the first time, and I see we actually have a pretty full room today, that's fantastic. We will be following up from this webinar with emails to everyone with a link to the recording of this session. So feel free, you'll be able to walk away with that as well. We'll also be hosting recordings on the Autmantic YouTube channel and also on the autmantic.com Learn portal. So you can find all of our recordings of past webinars either on YouTube or on the autmantic.com website as well. If you have any questions during the seminar, I'd rather have this be an interactive type of discussion, so feel free to submit your questions. Depending on which version of the GoToWebinar client you have will depend on whether you use the questions panel or the chat window. So we'll be keeping an eye on both of those. So feel free to submit any questions you have during the webinar itself. Once the webinar is done, or if you leave early, there's a very short 3-question survey. Please take a moment to answer it. We use the information that you provide to help us select new webinar concepts for the future. For those of you who are following along, you can also get a copy of this presentation in the GoToWebinar handouts panel. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you can find it on the autmantic.com website under the Learn section. So just look up this webinar on the autmantic.com website, and you can actually download a copy of this as an Acrobat PDF. Today, we're really going to be focusing in just on how to use Open-AudIT's logs and tables to aid in troubleshooting, how to read the Open-AudIT logs, the discovery log especially, and how to use the interface to understand what's happening with your discoveries. Open-AudIT is an extremely flexible, agentless device discovery and auditing platform, but because it does deal with so many different types of operating systems, network topologies, and security settings, there are always something that can be misconfigured between the Open-AudIT server and the actual end device. By learning how to interpret the information that's in the logs, it can make you much more successful in auditing your network. I always like to map these types of features and functionality back to Gartner's IT Service Management Maturity Model. You'll notice here that when it comes to Open-AudIT, it helps get you into level 1 by providing a concrete and detailed inventory. It moves you into level 2 by helping support automation and mature problem configuration, change asset and performance management processes. It helps you integrate processes as well. Many people use Open-AudIT as a CMDB for their environment. And of course, that helps drive you towards level 4 by helping to fill in requirements for IT as a strategic business partner. Few references for everyone. This is just a starting point, really. So links to the documentation and information that's available on the autmantic.com website regarding asset auditing, discovery, and compliance, followed by the Open-AudIT wiki. And that is just the home page. There's more than 200 pages on the wiki, lots of good content. We'll actually be taking a look at a little bit of that today. And the presentation, almost every screen of the presentation has a link to a specific reference page in the Open-AudIT wiki. There's also a link to the download for the Autmantic VM as well. So you can take a look at the virtual machine. So the VM is based on CentOS 6.10. It has most of Autmantic's solutions pre-installed and pre-configured on it. So if you want to just spin it up in your environment and see how Open-AudIT or NMIS or any of the other Autmantic solutions do for you, that's a fantastic approach. You can, of course, install Open-AudIT natively on any 64-bit Linux platform or on a 64-bit version of Windows. For those of you who do not have a support contract yet with Autmantic, you can post your questions to the community questions board. And of course, if you're a supported customer, you can send questions to support@autmantic.com. So Open-AudIT comes in 3 different versions. So we do have a free and open source version that we are committed to maintaining and keeping out in the marketplace. It is complete and fully functioning. It does everything that the professional and enterprise does, with the exception of scheduled discoveries, cloud auditing, baselines, and a few kind of extensive enterprise type features and functionality like file folder auditing and a few other pieces. But again, many people use the community edition and start with that for small deployments, and then build up and step into either the professional or the enterprise edition as their requirements grow, either for additional features that are specifically only available in professional or enterprise, or just simply the ability to schedule discoveries. That's one of the most powerful pieces of the professional release, is the ability to schedule the audits of your subnets and your AD controllers after hours, weekends, nights, and then be able to come in the next day and have a report in your email box that says, these are the new devices that were discovered overnight, these are the new installations of software, and these are the changes to the existing devices in the network. So again, not to turn this into a sales presentation, but just to help you understand the differences between the 3 levels of product. And this page is available directly on the Autmantic wiki, as well as the autmantic.com sales section of the site, or product information section rather. So you can understand exactly what features and functionality are out there now. In the latest release, which is 2.3.1, we also added the ability to visually map and graph racks. So racks of devices, you can actually visually lay out where your devices are in your racks. And you can also do cloud auditing with the Linux version currently. You can audit AWS and Azure cloud deployments and pull back your full list of devices that are out there on both of those. Again, that's only available currently on the Linux build for 2.3.1. We do expect that to have out in Windows shortly as well, and to add in Google cloud auditing support. All right, so before we can get into talking about actually troubleshooting your discoveries, we have to understand first how the system works. How does Open-AudIT work? How does it actually do its device discovery and auditing? So the first thing to understand is that Open-AudIT is an agentless device discovery and auditing solution. So you don't have to deploy some kind of an agent out there onto your machines. We do have auditing scripts that are used for Windows, Linux, Unix, AIX, Sun Solaris, HPUX devices, but those are all deployed after we discover the device and we determine what kind of device it is. You'll notice later on, as we touch on auditing complex network environments, that you can actually deploy those audit scripts ahead of schedule and then use some kind of a scheduling tool like Windows Task Scheduler or cron on Linux to kick that audit script off, run it locally on the machine, and then have it return the results back. So that works really, really well on machines which are either can't accept inbound connections from the Open-AudIT server, or which might be machines like laptops that are with sales teams or out there in the field. And so that way, when someone, say, boots up the machine, it might run the audit script 5 or 10 minutes after boot up and after a network connection has been made, and then return the results of that audit script back. So lots of really, really good opportunities there. So I mentioned the concept of many different ways that you can audit devices. The great thing is, irregardless of the method you use to audit a device, the troubleshooting really, there's a workflow for troubleshooting, and you just start within the process. So whether you're doing device discovery and auditing from the Open-AudIT server, whether you're using an Open-AudIT collector to do your device discovery, or if you've deployed an auditing script and you're having it return the results, you can actually still follow the troubleshooting methodology that I'm going to present today and pull that information back. Again, we've got a question here on the presentation. You can download a copy directly from the GoToWebinar handouts panel of today's presentation in PDF format with all of the links and all of the contents you see today. And if you're viewing this later on after the GoToWebinar, then you can download it directly from the autmantic.com website. Just look for the Learn section of the website and find this presentation. So how does the discovery flow process work? And this is the important piece, is that we separate the concept of the subnet as a whole from the auditing of the individual device. So once an IP address is determined to have a device on it, we actually start splitting out those process trees and dealing with the devices one at a time as they're discovered. So as we work through the process, the actual subnet audit begins. A network group is created if it's needed, if it doesn't already exist. The external nmap script is started. Once that starts, flow kind of cuts over to the right here. The results of that nmap script are pulled back. If we see that the SNMP port is open, right? So 161 UDP is open, then we'll scan using SNMP. So we look for SNMP credentials. We check to see if that's available, if we're getting content back. If not, we simply move on and we say, does the device already exist? So do we have enough information to determine if the device already exists? If it does exist, or if it does not exist, rather, we create the device. If it does exist, we start by updating the device. Then we check to see if WMI is open. If WMI is open and we determine that the device is a Windows type device, then we'll start deploying a script. If the Open-AudIT server is a Windows server, we'll actually run the script remotely from the Windows server against that remote target. If it's a Linux server, if Open-AudIT is running on a Linux server, we'll actually copy that audit Windows script, it's a VB script, to that Windows machine and then run it remotely. Next, we'll check to see if SSH is open. If SSH is open and we determine that it's a Linux type device, so it's not a Windows type device, we will actually copy the correct type of audit script over to it. So this only talks about audit Linux, but actually it'll determine whether it's a Linux, a Unix, an HPUX, ESX, AIX, Sun Solaris, etc. And it'll copy the correct bash type script over to that machine and execute that based on the operating system that it determines on that machine. So we'll be coming back to this concept again later in the presentation, but just again to give you an idea of what the flow is. And this flow and the steps that are here are critical to understand, because everything starts with the results of the nmap scan. Are sufficient ports and protocols open to determine that for Open-AudIT to consider this an actual device or not? And then from there, it determines, do I have SNMP? Do I have WMI? Do I have SSH? If I have those 3 ports or any of those 3 ports, then start using that information to query the device and determine what kind of device it is. So the first understanding with nmap is to understand that nmap looks at the first 1,000 TCP ports, right? So it looks at the top 1,000 TCP ports. It also looks at UDP port 62078, which suggests Apple iOS, and it looks at UDP port 161 or SNMP. And it's looking for more than one port being open, right? So more than one port has to respond as open. More than one, and this is important, more than one port has to report as closed. And we actually see this as an issue now and then, is that sometimes a router or a firewall in between the Open-AudIT server and the IP address will respond for an IP address that is blank or unused, and perhaps say something like protocol X11 port 6000 is closed. So it's responding for an IP address as a closed port, and Open-AudIT actually says, oh, so if that port is responding as closed, there's actually a device at that IP address, and that port might open at some point in the future, and so therefore there's a device there. So it's important to understand that if you start seeing closed ports coming back, that Open-AudIT is actually considering that IP address as a valid device. If for some reason all ports except for UDP 161 report as not available or not responding, then Open-AudIT does not consider that a valid device. So if you're only getting back UDP 161, Open-AudIT does not consider that a valid device. The list of open Nmap ports are then used to determine what kind of device it is and how to talk to it. So, for example, is WMI open, SNMP, SSH, etc. And then Open-AudIT starts executing commands using SNMP, WMI, and then SSH following the flowchart we showed earlier, and trying to determine what kind of device it is. So a few system configuration requirements. And there's a link at the bottom of this page to the information about network ports page. So there's a lot more network ports that have to be open, but these are the top ones you have to consider, right? So for devices that you're going to be using SSH for, so all of your Linux, Unix, ESXi, AIX, Sun Solaris devices, you have to have port 22 for TCP open for SSH. For your Windows type devices, and that's going all the way back to Windows 98, Windows NT 2000, all the way to the most recent releases of Windows 10 and Windows Server. You've got to have port 135 for TCP for WMI open. Again, you have to have additional WMI ports open as well, but you have to start with port 135. And of course, for any networking equipment, you've got to have port 161 for UDP. We do support SNMP version 1, version 2C, and version 3. We also support for SSH both SSH user accounts, but also SSH keys. Of course, the Open-AudIT server is communicating using HTTP and HTTPS. So if you have it configured with an SSL cert and you've converted it to HTTPS, you have to have port 443 TCP. If you're using HTTP, you have to have port 80 open on your device as well. We are actually changing that. We're moving more towards using SFTP and a few other technologies that don't necessarily need port 80 or port 443 open to return information back to the server. Also, for Windows machines, you need to have port 445 for TCP, for file and print sharing, and also your AD controller communications. Next up, target client configuration. So a few pieces, again, link to the specific page on the wiki is at the bottom of the screen. You've got to ensure that appropriate ports are open to the Open-AudIT server. So this is bi-directional communication, right? The server has to be able to reach out to the device, talk to the device, deploy the auditing script if it's a thoughtful operating system, and then the device needs to be able to open a channel back to the Open-AudIT server to return the results of that audit back. You need to ensure that appropriate services are running and configured for example, SNMP, WMI, SMB 1 or 2. In most modern Windows operating systems, SMB 1 is either disabled or not installed at all. It's now SMB version 2. That's fine. We actually support SMB version 2 on our connectivity to the servers as well. You need to make sure that you have appropriate credential sets for that server, and they do need to be either sudo or administrator right credential sets for that machine. You'll need to disable or configure local firewalls to allow the audit, and you of course need to check Windows firewall and Linux IP tables again to allow communication to and from that machine. User access control, DMOC setup on the on Windows machines. It's all covered in detail on the target client configuration wiki page. Generally speaking, these are the types of situations: either ports and protocols aren't open so that the Open-AudIT server can't talk to the machine or the machine can't respond back, or the local machine itself is locked down in such a way that it can't allow the audit query from the Open-AudIT server, or cannot return the results of the audit back to the server. And we'll actually dive into Open-AudIT in a minute and take a detailed look at how you use Open-AudIT to really figure out what's going on. So now that we have a general kind of overview of how Open-AudIT communicates with devices and executes queries with those devices, audits those devices once it finds them and pulls that information back. Let's talk about how do we troubleshoot those discoveries, right? And there are several steps in that troubleshooting that we're going to cover. So when you start, when you have a feeling that you're running into trouble, that audits aren't running correctly, the first thing I do is stop for a second, take a breath, take a step back, identify one device, one example device to start troubleshooting with, right? You want to check that device's target client configuration. In Open-AudIT, you want to disable blessed subnets. Now, what blessed subnets are is one of the first steps of discovery is to create a network or a subnet entry for that subnet in Open-AudIT that you're auditing. So let's say that you're going to audit 192.168.0.0/24. Open-AudIT will create an entry in its networks list for that subnet list, and it will only accept returned audit results back from subnets that are in that list. So if you audit an individual machine, if you audit a single device, Open-AudIT will not create an entry in the subnet list for that individual device. And if that device's IP address doesn't exist in the subnet list, then it will not accept returns back from that audit. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to disable blessed subnets. The third thing I want you to do, you're going to stop any running discoveries. So if you're using professional or enterprise, or if you have a discovery running in the community edition, you want to stop any scheduled discoveries that are running. You don't want them running in the background. You want to turn up your log level. So the log level is at normal level, which is log level 5. You want to turn that up to verbose, which is log level 7. That's all in your configuration settings. Then what you want to do is you want to audit an individual device. You don't want to be on the device details page and tell Open-AudIT to audit that device. Instead, you want to go to discoveries, audit a single device, add that IP address, and then audit that one device, because you're going to get a lot more detail back from that path than you will from trying to audit it from inside the device details. And I'll show you that in a moment. You want to audit that one device. Then after that audit is done, you want to analyze the discovery log table. Now, I actually give you the path here, the menu path, admin, database, list tables, to get to the discoveries_log database table, and you can actually export that to CSV. I actually like exporting that to CSV and then opening it in Excel, because I can do an awful lot of analysis and searching through that, and look at timestamps, look at different runs over different days, and that type of approach. But what we're going to show you today is how to strictly do it through the Open-AudIT GUI and to analyze the discovery log table and understand the information that you get from there. So back to this device discovery process flowchart again. So everything that we're going to talk about here really relates back to this flowchart, because every step that you take as you're starting to analyze Open-AudIT's information is about following this flowchart starting from this point. So you're going to actually analyze the information that came back from the Open-AudIT discovery of an individual device. You're going to look at that one device's discovery log table, and you're going to step through that, and you're going to read the information that's in the discovery log. And again, remember, you've turned the log level up to 7, so there's a ton of information right now in the discovery log. As a warning to everyone, do not leave your log level at 7. Only put it to 7 when you're troubleshooting discoveries. Turn it back down to 5. If you don't, you're going to end up with very, very large logs, which can slow down the Open-AudIT GUI and make your server lag quite a bit, because it's recording a ton of information into the log. So you're going to start by taking a look at the log and then stepping through mentally the steps and processes that you find here. All right, let's switch over to Open-AudIT, and I'm going to take a look at a specific device now. So I happen to like using this hardware device report when I'm looking at devices. It just gives me some good information. You can, of course, create your own custom reports. Open-AudIT ships with almost 40 reports pre-built in, and there are reports for all kinds of different ways of slicing and dicing information. So you can get information about audit dates. You can get a list of all devices that have no working credentials, failed audits. So there's a lot of really great pre-built reports that will help you with troubleshooting and giving you lists of devices that you have problems auditing, so you can just start from that point. But whenever I'm really digging into devices and I want to look at everything that's in my database, I just start from this report hardware device. Again, that's just my personal workflow. It works for me. From here, what I like to do is take a look and use the search window in the top right. And you can search for a specific type of machine. So I can search by, so for example, Windows. So I can start typing Windows. I'm going to pull back all my Windows machines. So you can see that I've got 3 Windows machines on my little demo network that are here. And I want to take a look at this one, Hell. Now I can click on the little purple computer icon here, and it's going to load in this window. But I want to leave this. I want to leave this search window open. So I'm actually going to use my browser's built-in ability. I'm going to right-click on that button. I'm going to hit Open Link in New Tab. Again, I have my browser set up to open Windows in the same window I have open. You can certainly configure your browser to work however you want. I like to be able to control with the right click and choose whether I open in the current window, a new tab, or a new window entirely. Again, my workflow, the system is flexible depending on which browser you use. Your user experience might be a little different. I happen to be using Firefox here on an Apple Mac OS machine. All right, so I'm going to switch to that tab for that device. So this is my Hell. So this is Hella. It's a little Windows 2008 server. It is a virtual machine. I can see that on the right-hand side under Manufacturer, Model. You can also see that under the serial number, because the serial number begins with VMware. You'll notice in the latest version of Open-AudIT Enterprise, version 2.3.1, we do open, if there's been an issue discovered in the discovery, it'll actually load that. So we have a new panel called the Discovery Issues panel, and that's actually available now under the summary. So you'll see Discovery Issues over here on the left. That automatically opens now when you bring up the Device Details page. So that's a new addition to 2.3.1, and we're actually going to be building that out much more over the next several releases over the next 4 or 6 months this year. So that's a huge priority for Augmentech, is improving kind of the support and verbosity that Open-AudIT gives you in helping you troubleshoot. But you can see here that for this device, no valid SSH credentials were discovered, so that's fantastic. I'm going to close out that panel. Just a bit of background here over on the left under Summary. You can see details, so we're getting a lot of good information about the fully qualified, the FQDN, DNS information, the domain that we belong to. We can see over on the right under Last Seen By, you can see how this was audited, right? So that tells you how far in the process it went. So it actually completed a WMI audit of this Windows machine. So if I go back to my PowerPoint, so it actually made it all the way to this point. It did that audit. It didn't have any working SSH credentials, so it went this direction and went over here. So it completed a WMI audit on that device. All right. Over on the left-hand side, I'm going to bring up the discovery log. Now again, I'm running at log level is 7, so this is very, very verbose. But this is the last discovery log of this device, and we can look through on the timestamps on this, how information was pulled back, what dates that information was pulled back, and how it was stored. So a lot of good information that's here. And I'm just going to sort this by date, and then I'm going to stretch this out to show me all of my entries. Now what I want to do is I want to scroll down here and find some of the most recent audit dates. So that's going to be the looks like January 8th audit date here. So we're starting to pull information. So here's the start of the audit, and you can see this is the running of the nmap command. Again, looking back at the process. Right now, we're down here at the nmap script result per IP. So we're starting that point. And then we have all of the entries on the open ports and protocols. And you can see there are quite a few ports and protocols that are open. The next scan that we do is we do another nmap scan to look to see if port 161 UDP for SNMP is open or not. And then we begin the actual audit. So we're trying to determine, does this device already exist in the database? And you can see here we found a match. So we resolved the fully qualified domain name of the device that we found. So an audit started, a discovery started. We found a device at a specific IP address. We discovered that the device at the IP address matches a device that's in our database now. So we're continuing to run our matching commands. We have a hit on the IP address in the network table. And then you can see that we found a device. Device with ID 79 found on initial nmap scan. So going back to the PowerPoint again. So we've passed this, we found a device, and we've determined that the device exists, right? So we're going to be updating that device. So the next thing we're looking at is we're looking at the state, the status of those three ports that we really care about: WMI, SSH, and SNMP. So port 22 is open for SSH, 161 UDP is open for SNMP, and 135 is open for WMI. So all three of those ports are open. So looking back again at this process, the concept here is that SNMP is open, WMI is open, and SSH is open. So it's going to start with SNMP first and scan with SNMP, then it will try with WMI, then it will try with SSH. So it's going to go through all three of those and look for credential sets that work and determine if the device is applicable or not. So if it's a Linux type device, even though WMI is open on that device, although I'm not sure why you'd have a WMI port open on a Linux device, but it could happen. It'll actually, Open-AudIT will say, hey, it's a Windows device. I'm not going to use, or I will use WMI. Or it's a Linux device, and I won't use WMI. So it's smart enough to figure out what to use and what not to use. So coming back, the first thing, again, we're going to do is we're going to start. So SNMP status is true. So it's going to start testing your SNMP credentials. So Open-AudIT has a credential vault. It uses AES 256 to encrypt all of your credentials. The encryption key ships with the system. You can absolutely change your encryption key. We actually recommend that you do. However, if you change your encryption key, you can't have any credentials in your credential vault at the time. Because remember, the credentials already in your vault are encrypted with the existing key. So if you change the key, the system can't decrypt the existing credentials. So you'd have to delete the existing credentials, change your key, change your credential key, and then add your credentials back in to encrypt it with the new encryption key. So it's going to continue going through testing credential sets to try to find a set of credentials that work. So you'll see here with the green check mark, credential set for SNMP version 2 named device-specific credentials working. Fantastic. So then it starts working and pulling information for the device. It'll start using SNMP gets, and you can see what it's doing here. It's actually issuing an SNMP get for specific OID over on the right-hand side. And this is a new addition, these little eyeballs. So if you roll over the little eyeball icon, you'll get a pop-up window that'll give you the complete text that came back, or the complete command that was issued. Sometimes these are truncated here in the display. So again, we're using SNMP first, so we're going to continue hitting this for SNMP. And it will, if SNMP, so if 161 UDP is open, Open-AudIT will attempt to use SNMP to talk to the device, irregardless whether it's a networking device, a Windows device, a Linux-type device. If SNMP is open, it will attempt to talk to it using SNMP to understand what kind of device it is. So you can see here, for example, we've pulled back the sysobject ID, so it's a Microsoft device, it's a type computer, it's a virtualware platform, manufacturer's VMware. Some of these are coming back are blank, and that can be normal, right? Sometimes these OIDs aren't populated. Some of these OIDs are specifically only for networking type devices. So we're continuing to pull back information. So we're pulling back interface information. So even if we can't talk to the device, we're actually going to pull back a lot of information about that device, even its interfaces via SNMP. All right, so we get to the end of that. So SNMP is completed at this point. We've pulled back everything we can for this type of device using SNMP at this point. So then we're starting an SSH audit. So we're starting and we're going to apply the SSH credential sets that we have. We only have one set of credential sets in our system currently for SSH. And so you'll see that we have an error here. So you have the orange exclamation point, no valid SSH credentials found. So going back to that flowchart. So we've done this, SNMP was open, we scanned via SNMP, we found it was an existing device, we've updated the device, and we're down here and we're actually looking at SSH at this point. So SSH is open, but there's no working credentials, so we're not using SSH at the moment. So the next thing that we're doing is we're going to go through and we're going to test Windows credentials. So we're going to execute a Windows command. So we actually have a software stub called WinExe static. Again, this is Open-AudIT is running on a Linux machine in my demo environment. It would be slightly a different view if this was running on a Windows server. So on a Windows server, we don't have to use WinExe static. We'd actually use WMI directly to communicate from a Windows deployment of Open-AudIT to a Windows server. So we'd be using WMI rather than WinExe static. And WinExe static -2 is actually a version of WinExe static that Augmentech has built out to support SMB version 2. So we're going to execute several commands. You can see that we're getting content back from those. And again, we're going to continue to run commands. And you can see the command. Again, you can see the eyeball here. So wmix cs product get UID. Then here, wmix cs product get identifying number. So many of these are actually duplicates of what we pulled back via SNMP. And that's normal and that's understood. And so what's going to happen is Open-AudIT is going to take the results that come back from the last position. So for example, SNMP might give us the serial number of the device, but then we also got the serial number here from WinExe static. So it's going to take that second entry and push that version into the database. So continuing on, at this point, the WMI audit is complete. So we're updating information on that device now. We're processing Nmap ports. And then we're starting on the actual script. So far, Open-AudIT has actually been executing commands one at a time against that device. And now what we're going to do is we're actually going to take an auditing script. We're going to make a copy of that auditing script, and we're going to attempt to copy that auditing script from the Open-AudIT server to the Windows device and then execute that auditing script. So again, I can hover over that little eyeball icon and I can see what's happening here. So we're creating a copy of the auditwindows.vbs script. So we're creating a copy of that. We're starting the audit, and then we're going to copy that script to the machine. So you can see that we're using SMB client. We're copying that script to the machine. So you can see the command that's being executed there. The next step is once the command gets written to the machine, we actually try to execute that command. So we're going to try to copy that script 4 times. So you'll see, for example, in this note, it says Linux attempt 1 to copy file. If that attempt fails, Open-AudIT will continue to try that to copy that 3 more times. If it cannot copy that file to that target machine, then you'll see that 4th attempt, it'll stop and it'll create the entry in the database, but it will not have a complete audit of the device. So you won't have entries for software, you won't have entries for servers or services rather. You won't have any information about any of the databases or Exchange server or anything that's running on that machine. It will stop with what it's gotten from just the WMI audit to this point. So again, that's an important understanding when you're looking for these. The next thing it'll do is it'll try to run that. So once the script gets copied to the machine, it'll try to run it. And you'll see here that copying the file succeeded. Then it's attempting to delete the temporary audit script. So you can see the unlinking here locally. So the local audit script copy that it created to be copied over is now being deleted. The returned information is now being processed. So information's coming back, it's updating system information, and then it's deleting the local returned copy of that script. So the information went out, it turned around, and it came back literally within seconds. It was already processing information coming back from that machine in between time 9:24:58 and 9:25:54. So less than a minute to create the audit script, copy the audit script over, execute the audit script, and then the results come back and start getting rid of the local copies of the audit script that it no longer needs and converting and processing that audit results. So very, very quick. And then at the very end down here, it's creating all of your entries and it's updating all of your processing. So by 9:25:55, the discovery and processing on this server has completed. Total time from start to finish, if I scroll all the way back up, it looks like we started at, let me stay with the January 8th audit. It looks like the January 8th audit started at 9:22:56 and was completed at 9:25:55. So about 3 minutes start to finish to audit this machine in its entirety. So keeping in mind about all of the information that's coming back, and let me just scroll back up to the top of the screen. We're going to close that out. I'm going to minimize the summary section here. Open up hardware. So again, we're pulling back the hardware information, your processor, your memory, all of your memory slots, what kind of RAM is installed, which slots have what RAM of what size, the BIOS, the motherboard, your networking cards, all of your networking cards, your multiple interfaces where they connect, SCSI devices and what they are, all of your disk drives. So we're going to find your local drives, your RAID arrays, the drives that make up your RAID, your map drives, your shared drives, all of that's going to come back. Any kind of optical drives, so CD-ROMs, DVD-ROMs, Blu-ray players. We'll also find your thumb drives, your SD cards, anything that's plugged in when the audit runs. Now this happens to be a virtual machine. If it was an actual piece of hardware, we'd find your mouse, your keyboard, your monitors, and those would have sections under hardware as well. As a VMware device, you still have a kind of a video card and a sound card as well. But we're going to find your software too. So we're going to pull back all the installed software, who installed it, what date it was installed, all the version numbers that we can find on that type of information. We'll pull back all your software updates, all of your running services plus their state and who owns them, any ODBC drivers that are related to the installation as well. This machine doesn't have it, but if you had Microsoft SQL Server installed, would pull back information about your databases, the tables that are installed, the size of the databases, how much memory they take up. You'll pull back your settings, like your DNS settings. If you're doing file and folder auditing, we'll actually pull back all of those audit results on those files and folders, who's made changes, all of your local log files, your netstat information. You also have your Nmap information back when ports and protocols are open, all of your routing tables for that machine, all of your shares. So these are local files and folders that are shared out from this machine to other users. All of your local user accounts and what their states are. Are they enabled, disabled, status, what type it is. All of your user groups and what local users belong to them. So all that comes back, and all your environmental variables as well. So in 3 minutes, start to finish, we discovered the device, Open-AudIT discovered the device, and gathered all of that information about this device in just 3 minutes. All right, so I'm going to close out this tab. Let's go back over here. Let's take a look at a slightly different audit. So we're going to take a look at this AW Windows device. Again, I right-clicked on that system ID, the purple computer here, and just clicked Open Link in New Tab. And so I'm going to select that tab. And you'll notice again that we're getting some really verbose pop-ups here now, right, with this new discovery issues piece. So again, this is brand new in version 2.3.1. If nothing else, I would upgrade to 2.3.1 just for this feature, because this makes it very quick and very obvious what is working and what is not working with an audit on a specific device. So you can see here, for example, there are no valid SNMP credentials, there are no valid SSH credentials, and there are no valid Windows credentials for this device. So it's a complete fail. It's been able to audit the device somewhat, and let's take a look at what it's gotten. Now this device happens to be in the cloud. So this is on AWS. And you can see that we can pull up our cloud details about this device. But if I'm looking at the details here, you'll see we do have some DNS information, some fully qualified domain name stuff, but we don't have the operating system, we don't have the name, the version, we don't have the serial number, and most particularly, you can see here under last seen by, it was only seen by Nmap. And again, that's because we don't have a set of credentials installed in our credential vault for this device. So we weren't able to get beyond just a basic Nmap scan. So coming back to our flowchart, so back to here again, we started the Nmap scan and we found the device. And even if SNMP is open, even if SNMP is yes, if there's no credentials, it doesn't do anything. So it determines if does the device already exist. It either creates a new device entry or updates the device. Even if WMI is open, if there's no credentials, it goes down. Even if SSH is open, if there's no credentials, it's back to here. And we're at the end. So there's really nowhere to go from here. If there's no credentials at work, there's no credentials at work. So let's take a look at what that looks like from the discovery log standpoint. So over on the left, I'm going to open the discovery log. And again, I'm going to stretch this out to all entries, and I'm going to sort this by my last audit time. So you can see that that was December 13th. So we're starting an audit here at 2341. So discovery subnet, ID 780 was provided as the input. Processing has started. And because this is a cloud machine, we're actually marking it as WMI, SSH, and SNMP are all open. Most Amazon, most cloud instances don't really like Nmap running in their cloud environment, pinging their servers. And so in many cases, Nmap is blocked by the routers and firewall that AWS and Amazon Azure provide for you. So depending on what kind of a cloud deployment you have, Open-AudIT is actually proactively saying, well, you know what, I'm going to think that those 3 ports are open, and then we're just going to try credentials and see what we can do. So the next thing it does is it's testing SNMP credentials. So it's going to test all of those credentials and see if any of those work. And so you can see that we have a failure, no SNMP credentials found. Again, this is strictly for cloud type devices. Otherwise, Nmap would be used to determine if SSH, SNMP, or WMI were open on the device. Next, we're going to go test SSH credentials. So the SSH credentials were tried. No valid SSH credentials seemed to work. Then we went on to Windows credentials. And again, no valid Windows credentials worked for this system. So it created an entry based on the Nmap data it had, and then it stopped processing this device. So from a troubleshooting standpoint, if we go back to PowerPoint and let's just move forward a step here. Did Nmap recognize a device at that IP address? Yes, it did. Which ports protocols were open? Because this happened to be a cloud deployment, we had to spoof those. Are the correct ports open for the protocol you would expect? I'm not sure. I don't know what kind of device it is yet. Were credentials accepted? No, there were not. So because no credentials were accepted, we didn't even get to step 5, right, in log analysis. So the first thing I have to do is I have to fix my credentials. I've got to actually make sure I've got a set of credentials in the system that work for this device. So my next step would be to add sets of credentials and then come back into Discovery and discover a single device and just try to audit this one device. And I would audit it by its IP address since I have that, or I could go back to my cloud discovery and try to rediscover it through the cloud discovery option as well. So I could go through that option because this happens to be a cloud device. So let's take a look at a device that's a little different. So we're going to take a look at this little Windows desktop. So this is a little laptop that we've got. Now this device is interesting. When we open up the details pane, it has a slightly different entry here. So you notice that this doesn't say audited by SNMP, WMI, or SSH. It actually says last seen by audit. So that's an interesting piece. What that means is that the person who used this device last, who audited this device, came to the Open-AudIT server using their browser, and on the Open-AudIT server's login page, there's a link that says audit your device, and that's what they did. They selected, I want to audit my device, and Open-AudIT said, okay, here's the audit script, save it and run it, and here's the command and how you have to run it. And so they followed that direction, and that's what gave this entry. So they audited this device back on April 20th of last year. So you can see that here. And they just did that through the Open-AudIT GUI. So if you see last seen by audit, that's what that means. And so just so you can see what that looks like, I'm going to log out. And so you can see where it says click here to audit this PC. So that will actually cue me to save the audit script on my machine and then run it locally and audit my PC. So I'm going to log back in. And I'm going to go back to that report that I like, report hardware device. Again, you don't have to use this report if there are other reports that work for you, that work better for your workflow. I'm just doing this because it shows me all of my devices, irregardless of device status. So even devices marked as deleted will appear in this report. All right, so let's take a look at a device with a SNMP audit. So here's a little router for us. So this is Asgard, and again, I'm going to right-click and hit open a new tab. Asgard, little Cisco iOS device. Take a look at the details. You can see that this was audited by SNMP. So this is a network type device where SNMP responded for this device, and it audited the device by SNMP. So we're going to take a look at why we didn't get do anything else here. But again, network type devices, SNMP is really the audit end. We often get asked, how come you don't use SSH and connect to the device and execute CLI commands? Simply because there are so many different CLI commands, not just by manufacturer and model number, but even by operating system version release number. the CLI commands can change wildly, and those CLI commands would need to be parsed apart, right? So we use SNMP, and we use the core sets of SNMP and SNMP version 2 OIDs to query the device, and that gives us enough information to fully populate all the fields within Open-AudIT for our network type devices. So if I take a look over here, again, under Discovery Log, and I expand this to all entries, and then organize this by date and time. So coming through, we've got that initial, again, first Nmap scan. We find open ports and protocols. So we've got port 22 is open, port 23 is open, 161 UDP is open as well. So we've got SSH, and we've got SNMP is open. That's fantastic. So we start our process. We're looking through to see if we find a device in here. We have a hit on the IP address. So there's a matching IP address. Now, there are matching rules. There is the option to adjust your matching rules and which rules are used and applied across the board for the entire Open-AudIT server. We are working on a really exciting upgrade in the next release. I can't get too much in depth to it, but the basic concept is that in Open-AudIT Professional and Enterprise, you'll be able to actually adjust the matching rules on a subnet by subnet discovery basis. Plus, you'll be able to adjust the rules for Nmap and how Nmap works on every single subnet. We'll ship with defaults as usual. So as you create new subnet discoveries, it'll have that package of defaults from what's in your configuration now, but you can adjust those on a subnet by subnet basis. That way, if you're using static IP addresses or DHCP on different subnets, you might want to allow IP address matching on some and not on others. So we found a match on this device. We found a hit on an existing ID. So the device already exists in the database. We don't need to create a new device. And this is actually an important piece for you to consider as well, because sometimes you'll run into situations where you're auditing devices and a new device overwrites an existing device in the database. And that'll be an issue with your matching rules. In many cases, if you're creating virtual machines, so maybe you create a perfect image of a CentOS 7 device and you start rubber stamping those out, you might have duplicate serial numbers, you might have duplicate UUIDs, and all those things can cause challenges to you. So looking at always look at your matching rules in your configuration setup and looking and seeing what things are being matched here. What is the rule that's being matched on? So that might lead you to say, oh, if I'm overwriting devices, I need to adjust my matching rules. So here we go. We've got WMI status is false, SSH status is true, SNMP status is true, but we already knew that from looking at what came back earlier in the discovery log from the Nmap results. We already saw that here, right? But we're also echoing that down here. So we're telling you the SSH is true, SNMP is true. That's fantastic. So we start with SNMP first. So we run through all the different SNMP credentials until we find one. So here it is, credential set SNMP v2 named OMK SNMP is working. All right, so that's been accepted by the device. And it's important to understand that Open-AudIT will remember the last set of credentials that worked for this device. And it'll use that set of credentials again for the next scan. It'll use that first. And if that doesn't work, then it will fall back and start stepping through all the credentials that are in the credential vault. So then it's starting to pull information back. Again, it's using SNMP get. It's walking through all the different OIDs. It's pulling all your information back from this device. Based on the type of device it is, the model, router, it's going to be executing a few additional OIDs, a few additional SNMP gets that it didn't do when it audited that Windows machine Hella a few moments ago that we walked through. So now we're getting things like the OS group, the family, the name, the serial number of the device. We're executing SNMP gets on all of your different ports and protocols, your firmware. We're getting all your modules that are coming back, processing all the different modules that are there, how many modules are in it. And then we're pulling all that information back. So here we go. We got to the point where it wanted to look at SSH, but then it said, Open-AudIT said, now wait a minute, this is not a computer. It's not a DD write device. So this is not something I can audit using SSH. So even though SSH is true, we're setting it to false. So if that doesn't matter, we're also setting WMI to false because this is not a Windows. The OS group is not Windows. It's Cisco. It's something else, right? So because it's not a Windows machine, even though if WMI was open, we're not going to audit it using WMI. So now we're running the SNMP update. We've finished the SNMP update almost immediately. We've found all the network interfaces, all the Nmap ports. We're processing the type of device it is. There's no audit script results to process, and we're done. So let's come up to the top and take a look at what kind of information we've actually processed from SNMP for this device, right? So we've got the basic summary information here at the top: operating system, model, family, serial number, the iOS version of the device, all of your fully qualified domain name, DNS information about this device as well. And we're getting this all the way down. We've got the OS version, the amount of memory in the device, how much storage the device has. So we're pulling all of that information back. All your uptime, so when was the last time the device was restarted. Looking down the left-hand side, we've also got information about all of your IP addresses for the device. We're getting all of your SNMP detailed device. Under hardware, we're going to have all of your networking information as well. So here's all your network information for this device. So each of your ports, MAC addresses for those ports, if alias, if type, whether it's enabled, the administration status, the reported speed. And again, that's reported. That's what the interface itself is reporting. In most cases, that's a static field that an engineer sets. That's not necessarily a field that the device figures out or calculates itself. So, for example, we often see that devices shipped in and deployed will have the default max speed of the interface in that field, as opposed to what's actually being apportioned into that interface. Is that available or used or not? And that's actually a kind of a cool field, because of course we make that information available through various networking. So interfaces used and available. So you can actually pull that up, consumed IP addresses, and understand exactly how many interfaces you have that's available. And then we'll tell you how many days since that interface has changed its settings. Now we don't have an entry here for modules. Let's take a look at a slightly different device here. I believe this one has a good list of modules for us. So this is a little software-defined iOS router, and we do have a list of modules for this device that were audited and brought back. So here you can see, for example, that we're seeing the chassis itself. We've got the serial number of the chassis, and we have a module in this slot. This is in index 9, connected to slot number 2, Cisco Network Processing Engine NP400. We've got a software revision and a serial number for that module as well. And of course, you can sort these fields. And that's all coming back, again, through SNMP. So we're not even having, again, to have to connect via SSH and execute any CLI commands. This is all coming back via SNMP for us. All right, one last example I want to show you. So we're going to take a look at this. This does happen to be a little device out on AWS. I'm going to right-click on that device again. Now this one happens to be an SSH audit. So you can see here, for example, SNMP was open, but there are no valid SNMP credentials found. And if I look at details, I can see here that the last audit was done on December 13th, and it was an SSH audit of this device. Coming over here to the discovery log, again, expanding the log to all entries, sorting the timestamp, and then looking at that December 13th entry. So we're starting the audit. Again, because this is a cloud machine, we've overridden Nmap. And so we're setting WMI, SSH, and SNMP automatically to 1. So notice that this doesn't say status is open. It says status is 1 because we're mechanically setting it inside via scripts. And then we're starting credential sets. So we're running through all the SNMP credential sets. And you'll see here that there are no SNMP credentials that work for this device. So then we're starting the SSH audit. And we found valid credentials via SSH. So then we're starting to run shell commands against this. So we're running SSH commands remotely at this point. And again, with the little eyeball, we can go over that and you can see exactly what commands were being executed. Some commands return no information. So for example, we're looking for Solaris domain, right? We're trying to determine what kind of device this is. So here we found a name, OS group, Linux, Amazon Linux 2. We found the type of device that's here, software versions. We're starting to pull back information, board names. We're getting host names about the device. We're gathering information. We get to the end of that piece, and we're setting WMI to false because this is, again, it's not a Windows machine, it's a Linux machine. We're starting the SSH update. We're storing all the SSH information that we've found. We're then starting to retrieve the SSH script. We're creating a SSH script to deploy to the device. We're copying the SSH script to the device. You can see here that we're using SFTP to do that now. So we're moving it down via SFTP. Then we're attempting to delete the local copy of it. Then we're executing that command. We're actually we're changing the ownership of that file. And we're modifying using chmod so that we can execute that file. We're then going to execute the file. We're then going to delete the results of that file. We're then going to copy the results of that file from that remote machine back home using SFTP, and then convert the results of that file from XML, from its XML format, into locally parsable content and push it into the database. So those are the key pieces that you're looking for throughout this process. Coming back to log analysis, right? Did Nmap recognize the device? Were the correct ports and protocols open that you needed? Are those ports and protocols open that you would expect? So if you're auditing a Windows type device, but only SSH is open and not SNMP or WMI, you can't audit a Windows machine using SSH. So were the credentials accepted for that device for the protocols that were open? Was the audit script written to the device? Did the audit script run? And were the results returned from the audit scripts back to the Open-Audit server? So a few things that you can test immediately, right? So testing Nmap. If you're not finding a device, Nmap -F followed by the IP address of the device. Again, this is all run from the Open-Audit server's command line. Will give you a return list back of open ports on that device. And again, it's imperative you run this from the Open-Audit server's command line, not from your desktop. Running it from your desktop does not show that the Open-Audit server can communicate with that device. The second one is a command specifically for 161 UDP to make sure that SNMP is open for that device. If you have the right ports and protocols open, the next check is to look and make sure that you've got, if you're doing an AIX, ESX, Linux, Unix, HP, Unix, OSX, Solaris, you've got to have port 22 for TCP open. You've got to have Windows 135 for TCP open, which is WMI. Windows will also audit using SNMP as well. We showed you that earlier. And any network gear has to have 161 UDP for SNMP open as well. And again, we support SNMP community strings for version 1, 2C, and version 3. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes today's webinar on troubleshooting open audit discoveries. I hope this was of benefit to all of you. Again, the recording of this will be sent out to everyone. We are working currently on the next version of Open-AudIT. I know we just, before Christmas, we released version 2.3.1 with some fantastic cloud auditing and the ability to do visual racks, and also with the additional troubleshooting examples I showed you today. In it, we're going to be expanding troubleshooting tremendously in the next release, as well as adding a significant amount of ability to localize and really control your audits in professional and enterprise with the next release. So if you're interested in beta testing, once we get to a beta testing point, please reach out to beta@augmantic.com. Let us know who you are, the size of deployment that you have, and that you'd like to test the next version of Open-AudIT, either professional or enterprise, and we'll add you to our beta list for the next release. Again, thank you all very much for your time today. My name is Mark Henry. I'm a senior engineer with Augmantic's North American office. If you have any questions, my contact information is on the screen. Feel free to reach out to me. That is my live email address. That's also my cell phone number. Please don't write it on any bathroom walls. Thank you, and I look forward to hearing from many of you soon.